everyone, and welcome to We Go Back. I'm your host, Bryan Abou Chacra, and on this week's episode, we will be reviewing The Economist and Eggtown, the third and fourth episodes from Season 4 of Lost. We open up to Saeed, who has found a bracelet on Naomi that says, N, I'll always be with you, RG. And I just want to let you folks know that goes unanswered. If you want to do the research to look it up, I already did it for you. It goes unanswered. You can leave that one alone. This takes us into our flash forward where we find out that Saeed is one of the Oceanic Six, and we can see that he kills a man off the island who, when he finds out who Saeed is, he gets very uneasy and tries to leave in a hurry. So I think he knew it was coming. We also see him make contact with a woman who looks very much like Shannon in a bar called Die Mauer, which means the wall in Germany. They are in Berlin, and this is definitely meant to symbolize the rift that they have between Locke's camp and Jack's camp on the island in present time, or in the past, however you want to look at that. This takes us to Locke, who arrives at the cabin, but it's gone. No trace of it is there, and we can kind of see a little bit of dissent in the group here, where Hurley is very clearly not okay with the fact that they are keeping a hostage in Charlotte, and he objects to it. We'll now jump to the flash forward where Saeed is still in Berlin with Elsa, and this pager that she carries around is obviously something that is very important to her, but I think this whole scene is to show that Saeed will not let her leave without the pager. He wants to know when this guy is going to call her. You have to remember, he did call himself a headhunter, and I think his intentions are kind of very clear here. We now return to the helicopter where something very interesting happens. We see Daniel running an experiment with the boat. He calls and has them send a payload, which never arrives even though Regina claims that it does. Now let's go to the barracks where we see Saeed, Kate, and Miles finding Hugo locked in the closet, and he tells them all about the plan and how he's been left behind, but really he's just being used as bait because they knew that people would be coming to try to get a hold of them, and they wanted to see what their intention would be. Hugo is the least assuming person on that side of the island, so I think it's great that they use him here. And now I want to return to the helicopter where we see Jack having a conversation with Frank about the Red Sox winning the World Series. And I really enjoyed this conversation because in the midst of all of this stuff going on the island with these people trying to get Ben and whether or not they are going to be rescued, we have a little bit of comedy between Jack and Frank. As this happens though, the payload finally arrives, and the clock inside of it is 31 minutes off from the one that Daniel has on him. And I think this is really leaning towards a theme that they're going to start to bring up in this series, especially with Desmond arriving at this point, and we know what his abilities with time are. And now I want to catch up with Saeed in Ben's house looking for clues. This is before they get ambushed by everybody and find out that Hurley has been the bait for them the whole time. But I love that right before he finds this secret compartment in Ben's house, he notices that the Holy Quran is on this bookshelf. Now, one thing I wanted to point out that Saeed finds in this room is a 20-pound mark from England, which Joey pointed out to me was actually Faraday, the man who Daniel Faraday is named after. I would have never known that. Joey, thanks again for all your great insight on this show. Now I want to jump ahead to the conversation between Kate and Sawyer, where she asks him why he's staying, and he explains that there's really nothing left for him outside of the island. He knows he's a fugitive, and he knows there's nothing to return to, except for, we know, there is potentially a daughter that he had with Cassidy that he gave money to. So that validates his fear that that could be his own daughter, if she does exist. It's also consistent with Sawyer's not wanting to have a baby with Kate, that he keeps pushing himself away from being responsible and being a father. Before we get into our flash forward, I did want to bring up a comment Saeed made to John. He says that he'll have sold his soul before he trusts Ben. And this is all coming off the claim that Ben has somebody on their boat. But this comment of feeling that he's sold his soul does end up coming back at the end of the episode. I really like how Lost does a great job of writing a story that sets you up for a payoff later. And you may not know what it's for now, but at least they are peppering it in throughout the show. I really suggest when you do go back and watch this show again to try to just keep paying attention to all the little parts in this story. We now return to our flash forward where we see Saeed and Elsa in love. And just as Saeed is finally going to tell her the truth about who he is, she finally gets a page from her employer. And we see and learn that Saeed was sent to kill her boss. As a result, he gets shot and we find out that she's playing him. In the translation, when she's speaking to her boss, she is very well aware of who he is and why he's there. But Saeed gets the upper hand and shoots her none other than through the abdomen. Once again, just like Shannon, just like every woman who gets shot on this show, they get shot through the stomach. She dies much like Naomi with her eyes open, and I think that this is supposed to be a reverse for what we're normally seeing in Lost. Before, when we would see flashbacks, it would be exposition, like I said in the previous episode. In this episode, we are seeing a tie back to when Saeed actually saw the bracelet when he took it off Naomi, and I think this is their great way of making the story consistent throughout the series. If not, great little coincidence, but I really think that this is one of their fun little writing mechanisms. And this will take us to Saeed returning to the helicopter with Charlotte. He had traded for Miles, and I find it really interesting that while both her and Dan have the opportunity to go back with them on the helicopter, they stay because they both say that they have work to do. So Saeed, Desmond, and the body of Naomi fly back to the freighter and finally leave the island, which is absolutely crazy. We get an aerial shot of the whole island and they are actually getting off the island. And this will take us into our final flashback in the episode where we see Saeed getting patched up by Ben in an animal hospital in Germany. And he points out that he is only working with Ben because he's been manipulated to protect his friends. But either way, the comment about selling his soul is definitely coming back in this scene, and we can see that Ben has found a way to manipulate even Saeed. Now this raises another question for this episode, which is, if Ben got off the island, one, how did that happen? Because he was not on Oceanic Flight 815, so he could not be one of the Oceanic 6. That means he got off the island some other way, and we know the submarine has been blown up. Really interesting setup episodes that we have in these first 4 episodes. They really plan it out great for the rest of this season. Also, we have to remember this season had a little bit of a hiccup because the writer's strike actually happened right in the middle of the season. 8 episodes aired, and then they took a long break and came back and did the final 5. And this will take us into Eggtown, where we see a very familiar scene in John making breakfast for Ben. We could see that he's frustrated at the beginning of the episode and after he has a conversation with Ben. Very much mirroring how it was in the Swan Station. But I wanted to point out a comment that he makes here. Locke says that Ben should try reading his same book twice because he might have missed something the first time through. I think this is absolutely them telling you that you need to watch Lost a few times to really get the complete picture. And if there's something that I've noticed in watching this show over again, especially with this fine tooth of a comb, is that the more you watch it, the more you realize the answers are there. You just have to find them. Now, before I leave this scene, I want to comment on what Ben tells Locke about knowing that he's lost and has nowhere to go. I think this goes back to what I was saying about the theme that Locke has. He constantly will be told what to do and then can't just be patient to be told what's next. He's always trying to spark the next movement and do more. If he was just patient, maybe he would have better luck. And this will take us into our flash forward where we find out that Kate is actually one of the Oceanic 6 and she's being taken into custody and charged for the crimes that she committed. Her trial is not going well and her attorney brings in Jack to testify. And the main thing to notice from this whole scene is what Jack says about the events leading to their rescue after the crash. He lies about everything. All of it is fabricated. He says that he doesn't love Kate anymore, and I think that this is all just part of his perfect play. Now let's jump to the scene where Kate visits Sawyer in the barracks, and I love that he immediately knows now why Kate is here, and that he's not an idiot and well aware that she only comes to him like this when she needs his help. So as a result, Sawyer goes to get Locke and let him know what Kate's plan is. Her plan isn't exactly what Sawyer thought it was. She isn't taking Ben to Miles, rather she takes Miles to Ben. And I think that this is a great way that they play on all of our expectations, because we expected it to go down exactly like Sawyer said. When Miles gets in contact with Ben, he extorts him for the amount of $3.2 million and knows exactly who Ben is, what he can do, what he's capable of, and the amount of money that he can get for him. I think Miles is a really interesting character in this show because he's very abrasive, and we haven't had anybody like him since Sawyer in season 1 and 2. Even Hurley makes a comment when he says, "Great, they sent us another Sawyer." Locke catches Kate in the act and wants to know what Miles wanted from Ben. So he's trying to really discover what he needs to do next from anybody, anywhere. And the main thing that we see here is that he banishes Kate. Now let's return to our flash forward where we see Kate's mother, who comes to see her during the trial. Kate's mom is dying, and all she wants to do is bury the hatchet and be able to see her grandson. But Kate is stubborn and refuses to let her mom meet her child. We now go to the beach where Dan is working on a memory test with Charlotte, and he has trouble remembering even 3 cards. And I think that this is really showing you something about Dan. He's been really strange the entire time that he's here, always constantly struggling to figure out what he's saying and what to do next, but not in the normal way of that he's an idiot, but rather in the way that he just constantly seems confused about where he is. But this sparks the conversation between Dan and Regina. He calls to the boat because everybody's worried about the chopper getting there, and Regina seems to have no idea about the chopper coming back. She thinks it's still on the island. Now this is really interesting. In the previous episode, we saw a payload arrive that had a time difference between the clock on the island and the clock in the payload. Now we're seeing a helicopter not arriving after a day of it being gone. Either Regina is lying about the payload and the helicopter coming back, but then that wouldn't explain why the clock in the payload is off. So you have to consider what is going on here and really think about it, especially if you recall what Daniel told Frank when they took off the island. He said, "Don't go off the bearing that I gave you to get to the island." Now I want to go to when Locke tells Miles that there's no reason in having rules if there's no consequence for breaking them. And this, much like when he says it's never been easy, just stands out to me as really important for you to remember in life. And I think it's a great point that he makes. Why else have a standard if you aren't going to hold that standard up? And Locke realizes that he needs to enforce the rules that he puts in place, because Jack never did, and look at what happened when people would go off on their own, like Kate. And this will take us into our flash forward where we see that Kate's mom backs out of testifying, and Kate is able to cut a deal where she doesn't get any jail time, but she cannot leave the state at all. The biggest thing that I think she's been struggling with is being able to run away. And now she points out that she won't because she does have a son. And after the trial, she meets up with Jack in the garage, and Jack gets invited to go with her and see the baby. But he refuses to go, and she refuses to see him until he does. So this raises a lot of questions about what's been going on with Kate and this whole baby thing. She's really worried about how Sawyer's responding to her potentially being pregnant, but Sawyer does point out that honestly he's getting tired of her flip-flopping between the two, and that she just finds any reason to go back to the other. And this really ties into her staying put. When Kate gets home, we find out who the 5th Oceanic 6 survivor is, and it's Aaron, which really makes you want to know what happened to Claire, because as per Desmond's vision, Claire is supposed to get on a helicopter and get off the island with Aaron, but somehow it's Kate who ends up with him. And I love that it's Aaron because earlier in the episode, we do see that she struggles with that when Claire asks her to look after Aaron as they're drying their clothes. So I just think that Lost has a lot of great hints and nuances that if you just pay attention to, you'll be able to see. And guys, that's the point of this podcast. Email me any observations you have, thoughts, questions, theories, everything. I love all the emails I get every week. Always love replying to them. wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. Keep sending them in. Great emails. Next week, folks, we will be reviewing The Constant and The Other Woman. Those are going to be a lot of fun episodes. Can't wait to discuss those with you. Until next week, guys, we'll see you again soon.